David Chen had been staring at the same ceiling panel for 3 weeks, and he was starting to recognize patterns in the texture that probably weren't actually there. That one looked like a bird. That cluster of dots resembled the constellation Orion. If Orion had been designed by someone with only a vague understanding of stellar cartography and a commitment to disappointing astronomers. That discolored section in the corner had been there when David first arrived, and would probably be there long after he left. A permanent fixture of the Celestial Mercy Medical Station's recovery ward aesthetic. He'd tried complaining about the monotony to his physical therapist, a cheerful Keithran woman whose ears perked optimistically at everything David said, even his griping. "Boredom means you're healing," she'd said, her translator rendering her liquid vowels into crisp standard. "Dead soldiers don't complain about ceiling texture." Hard to argue with that logic. The Celestial Mercy Medical Station was a massive structure, essentially a small city built to orbit a neutral world and serve as medical support for the dozen ongoing conflicts in the Outer Rim territories. It was a marvel of multi-species cooperation, with staff from the Keithran Sovereignty, the Valorian Empire, the Terran Alliance, and another 20 civilizations David couldn't pronounce working side by side to patch up soldiers and civilians regardless of which side they were bleeding for. Neutral ground. Healing transcends conflict. The Lyrian Ascendancy's medical philosophy from 3 centuries ago, still functioning despite everyone's best efforts to kill each other everywhere else. David had been here for 3 weeks recovering from what the medical reports diplomatically called multiple combat-related injuries, sustained during operations on Helios 9. What that actually meant was shrapnel wounds from an explosion that had been closer than recommended, a concussion from the same explosion, second-degree burns on his left side from a plasma weapon that had been aimed at someone else, but hadn't been particularly discriminating about targets, and the general accumulation of wear and tear from 6 months in active combat zones. He was past critical care, no longer in danger of suddenly dying from complications, but not yet cleared for discharge. His body needed time to heal, his burns needed monitoring to prevent infection, and the medical staff wanted to make sure the concussion hadn't caused any delayed neurological issues. So he lay in a recovery bed in Ward 7, Section C, watching ceiling panels and trying not to think too hard about what came next. His squad had lost 3 people on Helios 9. Martinez, who'd been talking about the restaurant she was going to open when she got out. Kowalski, who'd saved David's life approximately 15 times through 6 months of deployment and hadn't been fast enough on the 16th. And Chen, different Chen, no relation, who'd been 19 and talked about his boyfriend constantly, and hadn't deserved to die face down in alien dirt while his squad retreated under fire. David would be going back to a unit with new faces, new dynamics, new people to keep alive. He tried not to think about it. The medical staff helped with the not thinking. They were professional, competent, and maintained exactly the right amount of distance, friendly enough to make patients comfortable, detached enough to avoid getting emotionally invested in beings who might die despite their best efforts. David had been treated by Keithran doctors who moved with liquid grace, Valorian surgeons whose metallic skin shifted colors based on their concentration levels, human nurses who spoke in familiar accents and asked if he needed anything from the commissary, and medical specialists from species he couldn't identify without his cultural database. He made a point of being a good patient, following instructions, taking medications on schedule, not complaining unnecessarily, showing up to physical therapy even when his body screamed that lying in bed forever was a better option. And he thanked people. His mother had drilled it into him growing up. "David, when someone does something for you, you say thank you. I don't care if it's their job. I don't care if they're being paid. You acknowledge the effort." So he thanked the nurses who checked his vitals, the doctors who examined his healing wounds, the orderlies who brought meals, the physical therapist who cheerfully tortured him 3 times a week. Small courtesies, basic decency, the kind of thing that cost nothing and made the universe slightly less hostile. Today was different because today was Founder's Remembrance, a holiday celebrated by the Lyrian Ascendancy, the species that had established the neutral medical station model 3 centuries ago. The staff were wearing ceremonial robes over their usual medical attire, traditional garments that signified their dedication to healing arts. David had been seeing them pass by all morning, beautiful flowing fabrics in colors that seemed to shift in the light, patterns that suggested deep cultural significance he didn't have the background to interpret. He'd complimented several already. Dr. Thuron, the Kithran physician who checked on David's burns every morning, had been wearing robes in deep purple that complemented his silver fur. "Those are beautiful, doctor. The color suits you." Thuron's ears had perked in pleased surprise. "Thank you, Corporal Chen. They belong to my mentor. Wearing them honors his memory." A human nurse named Sarah had ceremonial sash in bright red, woven through her standard uniform. "That striking, Sarah, really stands out." She'd smiled. "Thanks, David. Took me 20 minutes to figure out how to tie it properly. Totally worth it for the compliment." Small interactions, friendly acknowledgments, just being decent to people who were working on a holiday so soldiers like David could heal in peace. It was nearly midday when Nurse Lyra entered his section of the ward, and David's understanding of simple courtesy was about to get significantly more complicated. David had seen Nurse Lyra around the ward for the past week, always in his peripheral vision, always working other sections, never directly interacting. The Seraphim were one of the species he found genuinely fascinating from a xenobiology perspective. Not that he'd ever admit that out loud because it sounded like the kind of thing awkward academics said, not combat soldiers recovering from getting exploded. But they were striking, tall and willowy, with an almost ethereal quality to their movements. Their skin had a faint opalescent sheen that caught the light in subtle ways, and their fingers were long and delicate, perfect for the precision medical work many of them specialized in. Their most notable feature was their chromatophores, specialized cells that allowed their skin to shift colors based on emotional and physiological states. Not dramatic full-body color changes like chameleons, but subtle shifts in hue and saturation, patterns that appeared and faded across their skin in response to what they were feeling. David's cultural database said it was as natural to them as facial expressions were to humans, an unconscious form of communication that other Seraphim could read instinctively. Nurse Lyra's chromatophores were currently showing a pale blue with hints of silver. What his database tentatively suggested meant calm professional focus. She was wearing the ceremonial Lyrian robes, and they were genuinely spectacular. Deep teal that shifted to silver at the edges, the fabric moving like liquid light as she walked. The color complemented her opalescent skin in a way that was aesthetically striking, the teal bringing out undertones in her natural coloring that wouldn't be visible otherwise. She was checking the monitoring equipment for the patient in the bed next to David's, a Crithian soldier who'd been unconscious for the past 4 days, his storm cloud substance contained in a specialized medical field. David waited until she finished her check, not wanting to interrupt her work. "Nurse Lyra." She turned, her expression neutral professional, her chromatophores still showing that calm pale blue. "Yes, Corporal Chen." Her voice was soft, musical in the way that suggested her species' language used tonal variation for meaning. The translator in David's neural implant smoothed it out into standard, but some of the melodic quality remained. "I just wanted to say those robes are beautiful. You look absolutely stunning in that color. It really suits you." He meant it sincerely. The teal-silver combination genuinely did complement her coloring in a way that was visually striking. It was the same kind of compliment he'd given Dr. Thuron and Sarah, and the 3 other staff members he'd seen wearing ceremonial attire, an acknowledgement of effort and aesthetics, meant to brighten someone's day during a long holiday shift. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Lyra's chromatophores flashed through a rapid sequence of colors that David's eyes struggled to track, pale blue to deep violet to brilliant crimson to shining gold, cycling so fast it looked like her skin was glitching. Her pupils dilated. Her breath caught, an audible gasp that made the Crithian's monitoring equipment beep in response to sudden movement nearby. She swayed slightly, one hand reaching out to grip the medical equipment beside her for support, her delicate fingers wrapping around the rail like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "Nurse Lyra," David sat up immediately concerned. "Are you okay? Do you need?" She made a sound that his translator couldn't parse, something between a gasp and a question, and a sound that might have been a word in Seraphim, but came out as static in Standard. Her chromatophores had settled into a deep gold with crimson edges, pulsing in a rhythm that looked almost like a visible heartbeat. Other staff were noticing now. A Kithran orderly stopped mid-stride, his ears perking forward in what David had learned to recognize as something significant is happening, and I'm paying attention. Dr. Sarah looked over from 3 beds away, her expression shifting from routine monitoring to concerned focus. Another Seraphim nurse, older, with the kind of bearing that suggested seniority and authority, appeared from the main corridor, took one look at Lyra's chromatic display, and made a sharp sound in what must have been their native language because David's translator didn't even attempt to render it. Lyra was staring at David like he just said something world-altering, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, wonder, and what looked uncomfortably like terror. She started in Standard, her voice shaking. "Corporal Chen, you cannot." She stopped, her chromatophores flashing crimson again. The pulsing was getting faster. "Did you mean?" She tried again, couldn't finish. David was now genuinely worried he'd caused some kind of medical emergency through the apparently dangerous act of complimenting someone's appearance. "I just said you look nice," he said, trying to be reassuring and probably failing. "The ceremonial robes, they're beautiful. The color really suits you. I'm sorry, did I say something wrong? Is there some cultural thing I missed? I really didn't mean." The senior Seraphim nurse had reached them now, and she was looking between David and Lyra with an expression that suggested she was mentally calculating whether this situation required diplomatic intervention, medical intervention, or possibly both. She said something in rapid Seraphim to Lyra, who responded in the same language, her chromatophores still pulsing that gold-crimson pattern. The senior nurse's own chromatophores shifted to a deep blue-gray that David's database tentatively labeled as profound concern mixed with disbelief. "Oh no," she said in Standard, her melodic voice carrying weight that suggested this was very bad. "Oh no, this is Corporal Chen. Do you understand what you just said to her?" David felt his stomach drop. "I complimented her appearance. It came out as more of a question than he intended. I said she looked stunning. The color of the robe suits her. In human culture, it's being polite, being nice. Acknowledging when someone looks good. Did I violate some protocol? I'm genuinely sorry, I didn't mean to cause." "You told her she looked stunning in that color," the senior nurse said slowly, like she was trying to determine if David was being sincere or deliberately provocative. "You specifically acknowledged the color as suiting her." "Yes, because it does. The teal complements her skin tone, brings out the opalescent quality, and the way it shifts to silver at the edges catches the light in a way that's genuinely beautiful." David stopped talking because both Seraphim nurses were staring at him with identical expressions of shock. Lyra's chromatophores flashed pure gold for a full second before returning to the pulsing gold-crimson pattern. "What did I do?" David asked weakly. The senior nurse, her name badge read Senior Physician Kayla, took a deep breath that made her chromatophores shift slightly toward purple. "Corporal Chen," she said carefully, "I think we need to have a conversation about Seraphim culture and what exactly you just communicated to Nurse Lyra." "Did I insult her? Because I swear I didn't mean." Not an insult, Kayla interrupted, but definitely not what you think you said. She glanced at Lyra, who was still gripping the medical equipment and staring at David with an expression that suggested her entire understanding of reality had just been reorganized without her permission. I think, Kayla said, we should move this conversation somewhere more private. She made a gesture, and another staff member, a human doctor David recognized but didn't know by name, appeared to take over Lyra's monitoring duties. Come with me, Corporal Chen. Nurse Lyra, you as well. We need to sort this out before it becomes a formal incident. Formal incident. David's voice came out higher than intended. I just said she looked nice. I know, Kayla said, and her chromatophores shifted to that same blue-gray concerned pattern. That's exactly the problem. The consultation room was small and quiet, designed for difficult conversations with patients or families, soundproofed and private. David sat in a chair that adjusted itself to human proportions. One of the advantages of multi-species medical facilities was furniture that adapted automatically. Kayla sat across from him, her chromatophores showing a steady deep blue that suggested she was trying to project calm while probably not feeling it. Nurse Lyra had been escorted to a different location by another staff member, still displaying that pulsing gold-crimson chromatic pattern that apparently meant something significant. Senior Physician Kayla, David started, I genuinely don't understand what I did wrong. In human culture, complimenting someone's appearance is normal. It's friendly. It's meant to be nice. I believe you, Kayla said, and her voice carried the kind of patience that came from years of dealing with cross-species misunderstandings. But we need to talk about what that compliment meant in Saravam cultural context. She pulled up a holographic display from her wrist device, showing what looked like biological diagrams of Saravam chromatophores. Our color-shifting ability is not decorative, she began. It's communicative. Our chromatophores respond to our emotional and physiological states automatically, unconsciously. What we display is influenced by what we're feeling, how we're thinking, our overall internal harmony or disharmony. Okay, David said slowly, beginning to get a bad feeling about where this was going. Certain colors indicate certain states, Kayla continued. Fear shows as pale gray, anger as deep crimson, joy as bright gold. Professional focus as the pale blue you saw when Lyra first entered your ward. She highlighted a particular pattern on the display, deep teal shifting to silver. This pattern, she said, indicates professional dedication combined with personal contentment. It's a state of internal harmony where someone is fulfilled by their work and at peace with their circumstances. It's rare, especially in high-stress medical environments. Most of us achieve it maybe a few times a year, if we're fortunate. David was starting to understand and really wished he wasn't. When you told Nurse Lyra that the color suited her, Kayla said carefully, you were, in Saravam understanding, acknowledging her emotional state as harmonious. You perceived her internal peace and found it beautiful. But I just thought the color looked nice with her skin tone, David protested weakly. Yes, which means you naturally, instinctively recognized aesthetic harmony that corresponds to emotional harmony. Do you understand what that suggests in our culture? David felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. That I have some kind of unconscious ability to read Saravam emotional states. Not exactly, Kayla said. More that you perceived something most beings wouldn't notice. The average person looking at Lyra would see a nurse in ceremonial robes. You saw someone whose external presentation matched their internal state in a way that was genuinely beautiful. And you said so, out loud, in front of witnesses. She leaned forward slightly, her chromatophores shifting to include hints of purple that David's database suggested meant, explaining something important. Among Saravam, she said, openly acknowledging someone's chromatic beauty in the context of specific emotional states is something done by bonded partners, by those who have achieved such deep familiarity that they can read each other's inner states instinctively. Or, she paused significantly, by those declaring intent to pursue such a bond. The bad feeling in David's stomach crystallized into full-blown horror. I didn't declare anything. His voice came out strangled. I have no intent. I was just being polite. I've been complimenting staff all day because it's a holiday and people deserve recognition. I believe you, Kayla said again, her tone sympathetic. But Nurse Lyra doesn't know what you intended. What she knows is that a being from an alien species, a species we barely understand, looked at her and perceived something that most Saravan would never notice unless they were intimately familiar with someone. The harmony between her inner state and her outer presentation. And then you verbally honored that perception in front of multiple witnesses. David put his head in his hands. This is a complete disaster. This is a cultural misunderstanding, Kayla corrected gently. One that we will resolve. But I needed you to understand the depth of what occurred, why Lyra reacted as she did, why her chromatophores displayed the gold-crimson pattern. What does gold-crimson mean? Profound recognition combined with overwhelmed processing. It's what we display when something so significant happens that our usual emotional regulation can't keep up. Kayla's chromatophores shifted toward sympathetic green. She's not angry, if that helps. She's shocked and confused and trying to understand how someone she's never directly spoken to could possibly perceive her internal state with such accuracy. But I didn't perceive anything. David wanted to scream but settled for emphatic whispering. I just thought the teal looked nice. And that's what makes this complicated, Kayla said. Because you didn't mean to do something culturally significant, but the effect was the same as if you had. Intent doesn't erase impact. David took several deep breaths trying to calm down. What do I do now? You apologize, Kayla said simply. You explain the cultural context from your side. You clarify your intent. You hope that Lyra understands it was an innocent mistake born from human social customs that don't translate well. And if she doesn't understand, then this becomes a formal diplomatic incident requiring mediation, cultural liaison involvement, and possibly your reassignment to a different ward to avoid ongoing uncomfortable interaction. Kayla's tone suggested she hoped it wouldn't come to that but was prepared if it did. A soft chime interrupted them, Kayla's communication device. She checked it, and her chromatophores flashed briefly purple. The ward supervisor wants to speak with both of us, she said. And apparently someone has already notified the cultural liaison office. This is escalating faster than I'd hoped. Great, David muttered. I'm going to need to report this to my commanding officer. Dear sir, I created an interspecies incident by telling a nurse she looked nice. Please send help and possibly a different career. Kayla's chromatophores shifted toward what might have been amusement despite the situation. For what it's worth, Corporal Chen, your intent was kind. That matters, even if the execution was culturally catastrophic. I'll put that on my tombstone, David said. Here lies David Chen. His intentions were good. His cultural awareness was terrible. They headed toward the door, and David tried to prepare himself for whatever came next, wondering how a simple compliment on a holiday could possibly have derailed his recovery so thoroughly. The universe, he was learning, had a real talent for turning basic human decency into diplomatic nightmares. The meeting room was larger than the consultation space, designed for multi-person discussions with adaptive furniture that accommodated different species' needs. Present were David, Kayla, Nurse Lyra, her chromatophores now showing a steady teal with occasional gold flickers. The ward supervisor, a Valorian named Supervisor Korath whose metallic skin was currently showing agitated bronze tones, and a human woman in cultural liaison attire who introduced herself as Officer Martinez. Martinez looked like she was mentally composing a report titled, How One Compliment Nearly Destroyed Multi-Species Medical Cooperation, a case study. Supervisor Korath spoke first, his voice carrying the metallic resonance common to Valorians when they were stressed. Corporal Chen, I want to be clear that I understand you meant no harm. Your record as a patient has been exemplary. Multiple staff members have noted your courtesy and cooperation. However, his bronze tones darkened slightly. Your statement to Nurse Lyra has created a situation that requires formal resolution. I'm very sorry, David said immediately. I genuinely didn't know about the cultural implications. I was just trying to be nice. We understand that, Officer Martinez interjected, but intent and impact are separate considerations. Nurse Lyra is within her rights under Saravim cultural protection protocols to request your transfer to another ward or to file a formal complaint regarding culturally inappropriate advances. I wasn't making advances. David's voice came out more desperate than he intended. I know that now, Korath said, his metallic tones shifting slightly warmer. But the perception matters as much as the intent. We need to resolve this in a way that respects both your cultural norms and Nurse Lyra's. Lyra had been quiet since entering the room, her chromatophores cycling between teal and gold in a pattern that Kayla had quietly told David meant, processing complex emotions but maintaining professional composure. Now she spoke, her melodic voice quiet but clear. May I speak directly to Corporal Chen? Korath nodded. She turned to face David, her chromatophores shifting to a soft purple-blue that his database suggested meant seeking understanding. When you said I looked stunning, she said carefully, did you perceive my emotional state? Were you aware of what my colors were indicating? No, David admitted honestly. I don't have training in reading Saravim chromatophores. I just thought the teal looked nice. The way it complemented your skin, the way the silver edges caught the light when you moved. It was aesthetically pleasing. I wanted to say something nice because it's a holiday and you're working instead of celebrating, and I thought. He stopped, aware he was rambling. I was trying to be kind, he finished. That's all. I've been thanking staff all day, complimenting people who were wearing ceremonial attire. You were wearing beautiful robes and I wanted you to know someone noticed. Lyra's chromatophores flashed gold briefly, that same overwhelmed recognition pattern. You saw beauty without understanding significance, she said slowly, like she was working through something. You offered recognition without realizing the weight it carries in my culture. I'm sorry, David said again. I would never intentionally. I know. Lyra's interruption was gentle, her chromatophores shifting to a softer teal-gold blend. I have been working in multi-species medical wards for 5 years. I understand that humans communicate differently. Your compliments are frequent, casual, offered freely without the formal weight my people attach to such statements. She paused, her chromatophores cycling through several colors before settling on that teal-gold pattern. But do you want to know what was overwhelming? She asked. Not the misunderstanding, not the cultural confusion. What then? David asked quietly. That you saw me, Lyra said, and her voice carried weight that suggested this mattered more than he understood. In 3 weeks of recovery, you have been treated by dozens of staff members. Doctors, nurses, orderlies, specialists. Most patients don't notice individual medical personnel unless we make a mistake or they need something specific. We are functionally invisible, tools of care rather than people. Her chromatophores pulsed gold once. But you noticed the ceremonial robes, she continued. You noticed that I wore them. You noticed that the color was beautiful. You noticed me as someone worth acknowledging, worth complimenting, worth a moment of your attention and kindness. She looked directly at David, and her chromatophores displayed a pattern he hadn't seen before. Teal and gold and deep crimson all swirling together in a way that his database couldn't interpret. Regardless of cultural misunderstanding, Lyra said, regardless of unintended implications, you made me visible. You treated me as someone whose appearance and effort mattered. Do you understand how rare that is? How many shifts I work where no one sees me as anything beyond the being who checks their vitals and adjusts their medication? David didn't know what to say. The weight in her voice suggested this invisibility was something that had been bothering her for a long time, something she maybe hadn't even fully articulated to herself until this moment. Officer Martinez leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "What Nurse Lyra is describing," she said, "is something we've been documenting in human-alien interactions across multiple contexts. Humans have a tendency to offer small recognitions, compliments, thanks, acknowledgments, without understanding how powerful those gestures can be in cultures where such recognition is formalized, rare, or reserved for specific relationships." "We're just being decent to people," David said, confused. "Exactly," Martinez replied. "But decent is not universal. What humans consider basic courtesy, acknowledging someone's appearance, thanking them for routine work, treating service personnel as individuals worth recognition, is in many cultures reserved for formal relationships, specific social contexts, or simply not done at all." She pulled up data on her tablet showing cross-cultural interaction studies. "Your casual kindness carries weight you don't intend," she said. "In Seraphim culture, what you did is profound. In Kithran culture, it would be mildly inappropriate but harmless. In Valorian culture, it wouldn't register as significant at all. But the common thread we keep finding is that humans distribute recognition and acknowledgement far more freely than most species." "Because it costs nothing," David said. "Being nice to people doesn't diminish anything. It just makes things slightly better. Why wouldn't you do it?" "That philosophy is not universal," Korath said, his bronze tones warming to something more amber. "Many cultures view recognition as finite resource, to be distributed carefully according to social hierarchy and relationship bonds. Humans appear to view it as infinite and freely available." "Is that wrong?" David asked. "Not wrong," Kayla said, her chromatophores showing sympathetic green. "Just different, and occasionally overwhelming to those not expecting it." Supervisor Korath addressed Lyra directly. "The question remains, how do you wish to proceed? Do you want to continue treating Corporal Chen, or would you prefer reassignment to avoid ongoing discomfort?" Lyra's chromatophores shifted to that steady teal-gold pattern that David was learning, meant something positive. "I would like to continue," she said, "if Corporal Chen is comfortable with that arrangement." "I am," David said quickly, "and I promise I'll be more careful about cultural implications before I—" "No," Lyra interrupted, and her chromatophores flashed bright gold. "Don't be more careful. Don't stop offering kindness because it might be misunderstood. Just," she paused, searching for words, "understand that when you tell someone they look beautiful, when you acknowledge effort and care, when you make invisible people visible, you are doing something powerful, whether you intend that power or not." Her chromatophores settled into pure gold for a moment before returning to teal gold. "And sometimes," she said quietly, "beings need to be seen, need to be acknowledged, need someone to notice that they're trying, that they're making effort, that they're more than just a function in someone else's recovery." The room was quiet for a moment. Officer Martinez cleared her throat. "I'll document this as resolved through direct communication and mutual understanding. Cultural sensitivity notes will be added to both personnel files, and I'll recommend updating our orientation materials regarding cross-species compliments and recognition." "Agreed," Korath said, his bronze tones settling into calmer copper. "Corporal Chen, please continue being courteous to staff. Just be aware that your courtesy carries implications beyond human cultural norms." "Understood, sir." The meeting concluded with formal documentation and signatures, and David found himself back in the recovery ward within the hour, lying in his bed and staring at ceiling panels that still looked like constellations designed by disappointing astronomers. But this time, when Nurse Lyra appeared for evening rounds, things were different. She stopped by his bed, her chromatophores showing that same teal-gold pattern he was starting to recognize as content and harmonious. "Corporal Chen," she said, "I wanted to thank you for almost causing an interspecies diplomatic incident." Her chromatophores flashed with what might have been amusement, quick pulses of gold-silver. "For seeing me," she said simply. "For making me visible. For offering kindness without calculating whether it was culturally appropriate or politically safe. For just being decent to people, as you said." She adjusted one of his monitors unnecessarily, her delicate fingers precise and practiced. "Humans do that, I've noticed," she continued. "You see individuals where many species see categories. You offer recognition freely instead of hoarding it like precious resource. You make the invisible visible through casual kindness that you don't even recognize as revolutionary." "We're just trying to be nice," David said. "I know." Lyra's chromatophores shifted to pure gold for just a moment. "And that's your superpower. Not your technology or your adaptability or your stubborn refusal to accept impossible odds. Your ability to be casually, persistently, genuinely kind without realizing how powerful that is." She finished her monitoring check and moved toward the next patient, but paused. "The ceremonial robes really did suit you," David said, because apparently he couldn't help himself even after nearly causing an incident. Lyra's chromatophores flashed that overwhelmed gold-crimson pattern again, but this time she was smiling. "Thank you, Corporal Chen," she said. "That still means more than you understand." She continued her rounds, and David settled back into his bed, processing the strange day. He'd learned that compliments could be culturally complicated. That kindness carried weight he didn't intend. That being decent to people was apparently unusual enough to be considered a superpower. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was notice someone, really notice them, and tell them they mattered. The ward continued its evening routine around him. Patients healing, staff working, the great machinery of multi-species medical care grinding forward. But in one small section, something had shifted. A human soldier and a Seraphim nurse had built an unexpected connection through the simple revolutionary act of genuine kindness offered without agenda. And maybe, David thought as he drifted toward sleep, that's what humanity brought to the galactic community. Not just technology or military capability or diplomatic skill, but the persistent, casual, utterly sincere belief that everyone deserved to be seen, acknowledged, and told they mattered. Even if, especially if, they'd forgotten that themselves. The ceiling panels still looked like disappointing constellations, but somehow the universe felt slightly less hostile than it had that morning. And that, David decided, was